Hey there, everybody. Wow, we got a lot of people joining us today. I have to get back to Sharon's comment about a pumpkin cake. That sounds amazing right now. Um, Hello from everywhere. We got Cleveland, Georgia, Miami, Irene again. I see a lot of familiar faces here. This is great. Oklahoma, pretzel sticks. Is that you, Sawyer? Massachusetts, Michigan. Hello, everybody. Um, as you can see, I've already got this drawing started here. This is going to be a bit of a challenge for me today, so I'm a little nervous. Um, there's just a lot going on with this, and if you've watched some of the previous videos, I've worked on tone paper before. I had originally intended to work on this using just regular white paper, but with the natural tone of the board that I'm on, I decided that it would be best if I actually worked on the toned paper. Actually, before we get going, I want to make sure that my Wi-Fi settings are correct here. I noticed a bit of a lag, so let me see if this helps. All right, I'm back. For anybody who is new, my name's Scott. I'm with Artist Network. We're doing this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, working on a drawing. This is a great opportunity for us to sharpen our skills, really kind of refine our craft, especially if you're kind of stuck indoors. I know we've been getting orders that are increasingly encouraging us to stay at home. And there's a lot of stuff that you can find around your house that can help you to build your skills. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Drawing is something that I often neglect in my own art practice. I'm a painter more than I am a drawer. I spend more time painting than I do drawing, and I feel like my painting starts to suffer as a result of that. So taking some time to work on my drawing is just going to help me to build my skills as a painter. So hopefully this is functioning in that way as well. So as you can see, the subject here that I'm working on is this glass of water. I set this up just natural light. It was a nice sunny day. Coming in from actually the other room, and I took this photo, and I really was responding to the way the light was really intense here in this deep shadow of the glass. There's so much going on in this that it's far more intimidating to me than a landscape painting or something what I'm most familiar with doing. It's a solid object. It's got water in it, and of course, it's a clear, so the light is refracting and reflecting in really interesting ways, and I want to try to capture that in this drawing. As I mentioned before, I'm using this tone paper because it gets me part of the way already. It's pretty close to the tone of the surface of the water is sitting on, so I can drop down the values using charcoal, and I can build up the lights using the white chalk that I've used before as well. And then also there's a kind of a silver quality to the water that I really feel like the ebony pencil will help me to achieve. It'll get me a lot of the way there. So I'm going to really kind of experiment with mixing these three materials. So I've got my ebony pencil, I've got white chalk, I've got charcoal pencils, I've got compressed charcoal sticks, and I also have vine charcoal as well. So I'm mixing these three media to see how far it gets me here. Before I get started, everything seemed to be working okay for everybody. Hello, Marie. I see you back again as well. Mary from Wisconsin, Jane from California. If you're noticing anything, just kind of shout out here. I'm monitoring the thread. If you're going to be drawing along, I see a question here. So, Davina, if you happen to have your own cup, I always recommend working from life. I feel like that is going to be the best teacher for you because you're taking something that's three-dimensional and you're translating it into the two dimensions of the paper. I'm working from this photograph, and if you want to follow along with the same photograph, you'll find a link to that in the description of the video. So you can open it up. It's the same size. You can actually print it out. So what I'm working from is this printout, as well as I have one that's projected on the screen to my left here. So all of that will work. Working from a photograph is handy because it's taken that three-dimensional world and it's compressed it into two dimensions. And and that gets us a lot of the way there. And so that what that does is it allows me to focus on really the precision in the drawing, controlling those proportions, etc. But like I said, if you can work from life, that is going to be it's going to be a bit more of a challenge often, but it's a far better teacher overall. It can get a little frustrating, but so just do what you can. I don't think you should ever be inhibited to draw. So if you don't happen to have it set up and you'd rather work from photograph, go for it. So quick thing, I kind of started to lay out the proportions here. Some of the things that I'm looking at is I like to compare the width of the opening to the height. And one of the things I found in the reference photo is that width from the lip to lip of the opening here is about the same height as from the bottom of the opening to the bottom of the glass right there in the center. And that helps me to constrain the width and the height and gets me in the ballpark. And then what I can do is I can start to look at that opening, this vertical height here. And I feel like I'm getting pretty close to that. I've taken multiple stabs at this, and what I found is that I was a bit too open, and I'm gradually kind of narrowing it down. A lot of what I'm working on right now, actually a lot of these marks are going to disappear because if you follow along this top edge of the glass, it's actually a light reflection across there. It's not a dark mark, it's a light mark against a dark background. So I have it inverted here in my drawing. So I need to keep that as a mental note for later on in the drawing. But what's really important for me is that I understand what the paths are. I know where those marks will be landing. I just want to make sure that I'm not locking myself into those marks being light or dark at this point. So right now they're all dark because I'm just trying to identify what those paths are. And I'm trying to identify key markers like the water line. And in some of these, there are these forms here in the glass that I want to kind of illustrate as well. Understand what those basic angles are. Don't want to forget about the thickness of the glass. One of the things that we're really going to explore as well is that there are a lot of implied edges. So if I look, for example, at this center line here, there's no really hard line, but we perceive that because there's a shift in value and there's a shift in these lines as we lead up to that. And so I want to capture these curves, and I want all of these kind of indicators to line up together to create the impression of that vertical edge. So again, that's kind of what I'm thinking through as I'm working out this initial sketch. It's not only about making some initial marks, but it's also about getting my head in the game and really kind of identifying what all those problems are going to be. Let's see, so I want to get some basic marks here, get the basic angles, kind of map out the drawing. I'm going to let that shadow kind of run off. One of the ways I can help to establish the length of that, so I take my reference photo and I triangulate that. This is called angle sighting. If you're doing this from life, you can do that as well. You just kind of close one eye and you hold your pencil out in front of you at the angle that you're trying to map, and in this case it's this one. I'm trying to map this top corner to the apex of this this curve in the shadow to try to find that angle, and I can carry that down here. And so if I take that same angle, it's pointing me to where the apex of that shadow is going to be. So it's going to be kind of right there, not kind of near the end. And because to make it accurate to the drawing, it puts the tip of that shadow right here against the edge. I know that's going to cause me trouble in the end. So what I've done actually, I've expanded the cup a bit. It's taking up a bit more space and has put me in a trouble spot where I'm going to have what's called a tangent, where if I draw that shadow accurately, it's going to align with the right side of the paper, and if I do that, it's going to flatten things out. So the choice that I have at this point is to either shrink everything and redraw the cup, which isn't too big of a deal. I can always get to that point as well. I mean, I've done it now once, so it's going to be easier to do it again. So I can shrink it so that I keep the correct proportions, or I can fudge it a little bit. And I'm going to actually choose to fudge it. I like the elongation of the shadow, and I think it's actually going to work in my favor to have it run off the page because then it also breaks up this side. we'll see. It may not work how I want to once the drawing is done. That's when I'm going to really evaluate it. But that's my thinking right now, is that it starts to break up these edges and I start to have these kind of clear divisions of space on this side. Maybe that's just some sort of justification, that, so I don't have to draw the cup again. But I feel like I'm getting close to mapping things out. I like that there's a bit of a slight angle to this back line here at the edge of that table. Before we get going, I just want to shout out, everybody seems to be doing okay. We see people, Dorothy from California, Gainesville, Florida, Laura from Virginia, Lisa from New Jersey, hello, hello, Jackie from South Florida, Micah, Cynthia, all right, yeah, welcome. It's been a long time since I've been to Maryland. I enjoyed my time there in Baltimore at Micah. So, we see Tina from North Carolina. I think I might have missed some people. I've got it kind of expanded here on my screen. I missed something. So if I didn't say hello, hello to you all. I'm going to get right into it. Again, shout out any questions as you'd like. If I'm doing anything that you're kind of curious about, have questions about, I'm going to do my best to monitor as I go. I think what I would like to do at this point is establish the dark darks. The background here is such a key element in the drawing that, and key is kind of a pun, I guess, in there, because what that does is, by establishing the darkest dark, that essentially provides the key for the drawing. Everything is then tied to that mark. It's in relation to that mark, or that black that we've got there. And so if I establish that early, that will help me to evaluate the values in the rest of the drawing. If I wait to the very end, then what I run the risk of doing is feeling comfortable with the values here, and then when I add the dark, realizing that everything is too light in value. So I want to avoid that. If anything, I want everything to be darker than I'm initially perceiving them, because that's going to help me. The darker I go, the brighter that light's going to be. So it's always going to work in my favor to actually have it be a little bit darker. So that's where I want to get that black in there quickly. So I'm going to use the compressed charcoal, and I'm going to blend it with the vine charcoal. So I'm going to kind of do some negative drawing, but I want to be really careful. I want to keep my marks fairly light around the edges, because I don't want there to be this halo where I notice these marks wrapping around the contour of the cup there. So looks like somebody's knocking here at the door, but I can't get it. Perhaps it's some sort of delivery. All right, so I'm just kind of doing some negative drawing, but again, I want to be mindful of the marks that I'm making. And so I have these initial lines in here, but I also want to be correcting as I go. I don't want to necessarily trust that my initial marks are correct, because there's a good chance that they're wrong. And this is an opportunity for me to correct them. There's always, throughout the drawing process, you're always correcting. And that's feeling a little bit better. I'm going to talk about the lip of that cup a little bit more later. There are some observations that I've been making as I've been sketching it that I think will be valuable. I'm going to be using my smudging stick a bit. So if I let these marks become diagonal against that curve of the glass, then having marks visible in that background is going to be fine, as long as they work in my favor, as long as they're in service of the space in the drawing. And so what I mean by that is that these diagonal marks, I want them to feel like a plane that's behind the glass, not like a shape that's sitting on top of it, if that makes sense. Go right up to the edge of the tape. So it's going to bother me if I see those halos over here. This This is really, I can see a lot of dust, charcoal dust on here. One of the things you have to be careful with when you're working a lot with charcoal, you just want to be careful about your breathing. It can create a lot of dust. So just be mindful of that. You know, on a flat surface like this, the dust settles down, but I often work vertically, and sometimes I can kind of blow up in my face. So sometimes I'll wear a mask when I'm working heavily in charcoal. Something on this scale, I'm not worried about it though. All right, so now instead of grabbing my blending stick, I'm actually going to grab my vine charcoal, which is going to serve a similar function as the blending stick, but it's also going to be filling in. Now, this is kind of atypical of the build-up process in charcoal, to start with compressed charcoal and then move to vine. Vine charcoal is often used as an effective kind of layout tool, and you've seen me do that in previous drawings as well. But in this case, I'm building up just a lot of dust, and it's helping to fill in some of those gaps. So it's creating a richer black background there. And if you're new, there's in the product description or the video description, there's a list of the materials I'm using. And so in the next one, for example, as soon as I post that, I'll post what materials I'm using. And if you happen to have it, great. If not, do what you can. If all you have is a pencil and a piece of office paper, go for it. Do what you can. It's a very valuable drawing exercise. The whole point is for us to draw together. So, all right. So I'm really enjoying the depth of this, that black there. Now I can kind of smooth it out a little bit. And what's happening too is there's some kind of strategy here as well, in that this shading stump is picking up a lot of charcoal. And you may have seen me do this before as well, as I've used the shading stump as a drawing tool. Anything that has graphite or charcoal on it is fair game. Sometimes it's your fingers. Sometimes it's these shading stumps, so it's kind of a calculated choice for me. So as I smudge this, I know that it's picking up a lot of charcoal. And so if I were to go with this now and move into a clean area, it's just going to muck everything up. So I want to avoid that. Oh, we got Richard from Kansas City's in. Renaissance Botticelli from Belmar, New Jersey. It's a great name. All right. Try to be light with it. I don't want the dust to blow everywhere. Just trying to smooth things out. Kind of refining that edge. And there's a bit of a lost and found edge here. So if you're new, that's a term that I've used before that you may not be familiar with, but edges of objects in some cases appear to just kind of disappear in some areas. So if I look at that back edge of the cup, for example, it kind of rounds off into the distance, and it gets lost. And then in some areas it becomes sharper, say along in here. And so as we follow along the contour of the object, sometimes that edge can come in and out of clarity. And when you let your drawing reflect that same variation, it can really go a long way in terms of adding to the realism. It creates a sense of atmosphere. We don't often perceive things in sharp focus at one time. We're really good at seeing in focus in a very small portion of our field of vision. But it feels like everything's in focus because wherever we look is in focus. But at any given moment, a small percentage of our field of vision is actually in focus. So now what I'm doing is I'm starting to kind of map out the inside of the cup, and I kind of feel like I flattened this out. I'm using the screen to help me out here. Crossing in front of the video, it looks like. Let me see if I can do this. Does that feel better? I think it feels a little bit better. May not have gotten the ellipse quite right, but I can adjust that a bit later on as well. All right, so back to drawing with this. Yeah, I'm going to draw with this for now. I'm going to get some of these marks established here that I see them. So now what I'm doing is, early on I was concerned more with identifying the paths. So now that I have the paths laid out, I want to evaluate what the value is along that path. Do I shift from light to dark, etc. So, and there again, there's kind of a silvery quality to the cup that I might use the ebony pencil for. Just kind of scooping up some of that charcoal dust. And there's that thin line of light that catches along there, and so I want to be mindful of that. If I build up too much charcoal there, it's going to cause me trouble later on. I can erase back out, and I can add some of that white chalk to establish that highlight, but I just want to be mindful of that at this point. All right, I think I need to actually draw here. This is where I'm going to pull out my charcoal pencil, and I'm going to start to establish this kind of inside rim. And now this is where I can use the pivot of my wrist to try to create that curve. And I'm not 100% happy with it at this point, but that's all right. We continue to adjust. Let me see here. Again, trying to be mindful of that white highlight along there. Thank you, Annabella. Yeah, my head's crossing in the way. Try to back off there. Sorry about that. All right. Starting to feel all right. I can smooth this out. Pick up more charcoal to help with the smudging process. If anything, I want to darken this right in here. I want to create that highlight off the edge of the cup along that rim. Yeah, I guess that opening is all right. This is really kind of a tricky thing. I need to ask myself how persnickety I need to be about getting that curve correct at this point, because I've got so much to get through. Don't have a whole lot of time, and I want to respect your time here, so I don't want to see you all or have you all see me just kind of picking at one area, but I feel like there's still some areas I can resolve with that opening. Maybe I'll come back to later. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to erase out the lip here of the cup. Use my ebony pencil. And so one of the things that I'm noticing as well is the shape of the top of the cup here, the rim of the cup, is such that, if I'm looking at this top edge here in the front, as I wrap around, it's not perfectly round. It's got a flatness on the inside, and it comes to a point and then curves around the outside. So I need to be aware of that, the path of that ridge, and trace that along the drawing there. And maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll artificially darken this a little bit here. So I want that front edge to pop And I can use the white chalk, but I'm going to do that towards the end. Right along here, I'm going to kind of refine that. Now, one of the things that we typically don't mix graphite and charcoal together, because graphite leads to a very smooth surface, and it'll take away the tooth of the paper so that the charcoal doesn't sit on it effectively. So I'm going to try to stay back here out of the light. But so in this case, we want to just be kind of mindful of that. You know, having a little bit of charcoal, adding the graphite into it can sometimes work. But if I build up too much graphite, it can be a challenge adding the charcoal on top of it. Now, let me see if I can. Now, one of the things I like to think about as I go along is that once I'm kind of confident in the map, in the paths that I've got established, then it's about methodically moving through it. Kind of working on one area, moving to the next. But at the same time, you want to be mindful of the whole drawing. So I'm working on this one area here, but I'm trying to also be aware of the rest of the drawing. You can see how much charcoal is kind of built up on the side of my hand here, and that's building up this value. I can erase that out later. Kind of smudge this in. Can use this to, actually maybe I'll switch to the ebony pencil to start adding some of these details. Now with objects like glass, metal, things that are highly reflective, you see sharper transitions between shadow and light. That's kind of what happens with shiny objects and glass. You know, if you can see that the difference on the surface of the table is far more matte. There's no really bright reflection off of that surface. It's not a sharp edge there. But what defines it as the glass as being glass is that sharpness. All right, so this is also an area here where if I look at that edge, it's very, very subtle. So I need to be mindful of the path, but also now be looking at the looking at the shift in value along that path. Some areas it gets a little bit lighter, you know, like right in here, for example, where it's kind of light against that dark background. So that's just kind of a visual note there, but I don't want to get into my chalk pencil too much at this point. All right, how's everybody doing? Hello from Bismarck, North Dakota. Hello. Barb, you lived in Bath, huh? That's where I'm, my hometown. Right here in Florida. Sure do miss it. I'm here in beautiful Colorado today. Lived here for a while. All right, so what I want to do is kind of keep moving through the drawing, giving myself some notes about value. Build up some of the value here. Knock down some of the tone of the paper, make that a little bit darker. Boy, that's really gotten messy. All right. That's all right here. Let's see. Using essentially now what's happening is my eraser becomes my smudging tool. But I'm trying to be careful not to just blow the charcoal dust everywhere. Oh, from Spain, huh? In Arizona. All right, so there's a lot happening in here. And I think, let's see, there are a few landmarks that I want to provide myself. One is this central ridge. Again, I need to establish the water line again. if I have that central ridge, and you can see there's this particular shape to the glass. That's too low. I need to move this up. Started drawing that along the water line. There's kind of this line back in here with that back water. Just some kind of mental notes. There's these dark kind of divots are critical to establishing the form of the glass, so I want to drop those in. And it's helpful at this point to really understand these forms as just pure abstract shapes. Try not to think about it being glass or have some sort of kind of preconceived idea about what you think it should do. Just look at it as a shape. It's kind of this crescent form. It's certain length. It's placed in a certain area. And you kind of move from abstract shape to abstract shape. Similar to the way Chuck Close might construct a portrait using, you know, this grid of small abstract paintings. We can start to do that as well. Instead of having a grid, now we have kind of a specific form of the glass that provides a map for us. But, you know, at the same time, we're just thinking about these as kind of abstract forms. And if you feel you're getting lost, sometimes it can be helpful to identify what it is and then move back to thinking about them as abstract shapes. So for example, as I'm working along here, I realize that what I'm seeing is, you know, the backside of that glass as being bent and twisted through that space. And if I understand that to be the backside, and I'm seeing a bit of actually the bottom of the glass is being bent, and I'm seeing it through the top of the water here, then from there I can kind of work back and with that knowledge go back to thinking about them as purely abstract shapes. So one of the things I talked about earlier is when we get to this ridge along here, really observing how the shapes bend around that. That's what's creating the impression of that ridge in that glass. Just kind of working my way up through there. Just trying to be strategic and not lingering too long in any one area, but let it just kind of move through from one spot and then keep checking where I am in the context of the whole drawing, make sure that things are feeling like they're lining up, which they are. I want to be mindful of the shape of the glass here. So again, I've got another spot along in here where you get a light reflection that's a little bit lighter in value than the background. So I don't want a hard line down here. I want that to be light in the end. And as I move down that edge along that path, it starts to become darker. Along in here. And then there's some subtlety in here along that ridge. Again, I don't want to get trapped in there too early. I want to get back up in here. This is a really interesting abstract shape. I don't really know what that is I'm looking at right now, but I'm just going to trust the shape and that it's all going to work together in the end. So there's this depth here. Where is it in relationship? So as I'm placing this shape here, I want to think about it in relationship to the other shapes. Make sure that they're lining up in the right spot so it gets a little bit darker in here. I don't know if these proportions are really working. I might have to make some adjustments, but we'll see. Work my way through here. Jam, I'm reading your comment about the oval. I hear you. That's a tricky one. Yeah, I mean, this is one instance. Drawing ellipses, drawing ovals is one area where really, if you can just practice, just drawing ovals, just as it's a great warm-up tool just to take a whole page if you have newsprint, just some sort of cheap paper, just drawing ovals and ellipses and getting used to drawing from the shoulder, from the area, and from the elbow, and locking the wrist and just drawing ellipses, some narrow, some more open, vertically, diagonally, just change it up. And the more you get comfortable with that, the easier it's going to be to translate into an object like this. And I tell you, like right now, I'm drawing with the wrist right now, and that can be helpful. But you want to bring that in at the very end when after you've established the ellipse by using your elbow and your shoulder to establish that. So it is tricky, but really, again, it's just one of those things where it's a great thing to practice. Just if you can, or if you're watching a movie or something like that, you pull out a piece of paper and just draw ovals, ellipses. All right. I want to keep working through, kind of squinting to check out the values. I feel I'm actually pretty close in value. I want to maybe darken in some of these areas a little bit later, but I can get back to that. This may be charcoal in here. I can also use my eraser. I haven't really done much negative drawing at this point, really adding, but I will be bringing in that eraser to pull out some of these forms later on. So again, thinking about this path, but as I follow down it, I want to be mindful of what's happening at each point. So along in here, for example, I get some light reflections that are lighter than that background, so I'll come in with that white, but I'm going to move down here and draw on some of these forms. Let's see, I want to establish the thickness of the glass. And then here, it's, again, be aware of that path, but think about how those shapes are bending around it. There's this kind of sharp bend along in here. There's a bend in here. Comes up and over, something like that. And it seemed to line up with some of the other landmarks in the drawing. Looking at this negative shape in here. So again, this is a lot about just strategy. And if you had seen some of the other drawings, you notice that I'm holding the pencil in the tripod grip, the same that you use for writing typically. It's not the way I draw a lot, and you would have seen that in some of the other drawings. But in this drawing, there's so much kind of tight control that's needed that's why I'm shifting to this grip. But I'm trying to be mindful of the pressure that I'm applying, because I know I want to be able to lighten up and erase some of these marks. Just kind of building up these values, blocking this main value in. And it's starting to, I can start to see it forming now. Let's see. And here's another, we got lost and found edge along here where it's a little bit darker in some areas. A lot of these weird abstract shapes in some of these areas of the glass. Again, just got to trust those. If you get bogged down thinking, this is glass, this is a specific part of the glass, start to think of them as abstract shapes. If you start losing the abstract shapes, try to identify what part of the glass it is that you're working on. So you kind of think back and forth and use your thinking to your advantage, the right type of thinking to your advantage at the right time. And you're going to kind of know that for yourself. You're going to feel it when you get lost. You're drawing a shape and all of a sudden it's gone. You feel like you have everything under control and then it's just gone. And so step back, take a breath, and try to evaluate, use the tools that you have available to you to identify where you're at, kind of gather your thoughts again, and then move forward. All right, it gets dark in here. So I'm gonna lay down some graphite here, knowing that it could potentially give me some trouble later on. And what I mean by that is that it's a dark value right down in here, and I may end up having to go and use my charcoal for that. If I've laid down too much graphite, it's going to be very difficult for that charcoal to stick. So if I get to that point and the charcoal's not sticking, what I may end up having to do is erase that all down and then build up the value in charcoal. So just something to be aware of. That's, again, it's not all that uncommon to mix graphite and charcoal, but really it's not a super common thing to do because it can cause trouble. I'm going to smudge this out. Now, let's see, any questions? I'm just going to check the threads. Hello, Leslie from Florida. I'm just going to call this a lampshade, all right. Hello, Alex from England, all right. All right, let's see. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser to help pull out some of the softer areas. You know, for example, right in here. Actually, what I'm going to darken this, wipe this down, use that eraser to kind of pull out some of these forms, do some negative drawing. I can come back in and sharpen up some of these areas in a little bit. Now I'm thinking very similarly to what I was doing before, but I'm thinking on the negative. I'm thinking about erasing out some of these areas. Some of these areas I'm not going to be able to erase out anything brighter than the tone of the paper, so I'm going to come back in later with the chalk. So this area right here, I've got this smudge that appeared, and actually it's not too far off from where I need it to be. But it's light along in here, so do some of that negative drawing. It's really light along in here. This is when I need the kind of the finer edge. Of the eraser here. Sometimes what I'll do is actually use a razor blade and trim off the eraser to sharpen that up. Just going to look for some of these lighter areas. Hopefully I'm not crossing in front of the drawing too much. I apologize if I am. All right, what am I doing here? What am I doing? All right, erasing out a light here, light in here. Some light there. Just reestablishing some of the light here. I want to make sure I don't lose my initial line drawing. It serves as the map. All right, it's getting there. Now I'm going to come back in with the charcoal, look for some of these darker areas, and that's going to adjust how I perceive the values that I've laid down. Again, just trying to see the abstract shapes. Move methodically through the drawing. And let's see, get this one in here. I've got this pencil sharpened to both sides, so I can be working on one. If it gets too dull, I will I'll just flip it over. So, all right. So what's nice is this paper seems to be holding that charcoal on top of the graphite pretty well. So I hadn't built up too much graphite, so that's always good to know. I know that some of these highlights are really they're gonna really pop when I get that white chalk in there. So if I need to build up value in broad areas, I will just use the side of it, and then that actually starts to sharpen the pencil for me. All right, I feel like now I need to get in here, darken this up a little bit. Finding this is taking far more concentration than some of the other ones did. Kind of knew that to get into it when we got into it. So I hope you're going to take the challenge here and work on the reflection as well. Just give it a shot. Just be kind to yourself. This is not the simplest of operations here, so give it a shot. Just like Jan was saying, turn it into a lampshade. You know, you just do what you can, learn from it. Who knows how this one's going to turn out. All right. I want to get back in here. And having this kind of refined edge is going to be really helpful along that water edge. Okay. All right, and then really paying attention to the changing shape as we get to the ridges in the glass. Thinking both positive and negatively in terms of shape. So I'm making the shape, but I'm thinking about it as I work up to the water line. Let's see what happens. It gets a little bit darker right in here as I lead up to that. I feel like that ridge is starting to form there. Boy, this one's tricky. I just had to do that because I'm kind of getting stuck in here. I need to move on to somewhere else. Let's see. Back to this area. And in terms of making it feel kind of more natural, just be mindful of the length of the marks that you're making. You know, let these edges accumulate together as a series of shorter marks rather than one long consistent mark. That's where we often get ourselves into trouble when we're trying to create a sense of depth and space, is kind of over-rendering an edge. You know, so for example, right in here, there's really that lost edge. I'm going to respond to that. I kind of really respond to that as a form. So I want to kind of leave that there. All right, move my way down here. Again, thinking about the paths that we're on here. I need to erase out this light. Now I over-erased it, and now I can come back in and refine that by looking at the negative shape of the space inside the glass. And it's going to change quite a bit when I get my smudging tool there. I feel like this is working out all right. How's everybody doing? Anybody have any questions? Is my head getting in the way too much? kind of like the double meaning of that. It's often our own thinking that it gives us trouble, kind of get in our own way sometimes. So. All right. I feel like this, I don't know, maybe it's working. And I guess it is working. I was kind of second guessing myself whether or not this is too small, whether I mess with the scale too much. All right, just a nice thin light edge there. Again, really paying attention to what's happening up to that ridge and trusting the abstract shapes. Boy, it's not easy to do. Kind of working my way up to the central ridge, because I view that as a landmark, and I want to get that right. By a landmark, I mean something that kind of anchors the rest of the drawing, and everything kind of builds off of that. So getting that right can go a long way in making this really feel solid, correct. All right. Taking a deep breath. This is starting to feel, I don't know about you, sometimes I feel a little claustrophobic when I'm working on something tight like this. My hand's kind of in there getting the details, and I realize that I'm just holding my breath. And I try to be conscious of that as I go through. So here, one of the things that we also want to be aware of is that just the change in the way the marks feel, different types of marks. So for example, if I bring this down, you can see that the reflection and the thickness of the glass along here, it's got a different quality to it than the reflection here where you have these larger areas. It's got a different quality there than it does, than we see in here in this area here with this with the light passing into the shadow. And so just kind of locking onto the gestural quality of that could be very helpful. So I know that this is, it's kind of a series of spotty, softer marks in this area. And I don't have to necessarily get it 100% accurately, but I can start to make marks that feel like what I'm looking at. And that can go a long way in terms of conveying a sense of realism in your drawing. It's just really locking in on what those marks feel like and trying to replicate that feeling more than the precision of it. All right, how are we feeling about that? I'm going to look at this from a distance. That's feeling all right to me. Now, of course, I haven't built out any of the highlights here. So Wolf makes a charcoal pencil like the general ones, but I think they're easier to work with. I'll have to try those out. Those Wolf pencils, that's what Jonas is saying here. I'm struggling with the oval. Oh, you're talking about the opening here. So when you're working with the opening, it's really a matter of taking multiple stabs at it. Just do this a bunch, and you can even do this off on another piece of paper just to practice your ovals. Try to see the axis that you're drawing, and practice kind of open shapes, closed shapes. And so, for example, when I was doing this closed one, what I found was I was feeling good about this bottom part, but as I came around, it started to, I'm exaggerating it here, but it started to kind of push in. It wasn't a smooth shape like this, like this again, exaggerating, kind of flat on the bottom and round at the top. And so if you kind of get a feel for that, like what's happening on the page, you can really practice that. And if you draw it, numerous times, within that, you're going to find the correct ellipse, and then you can start to erase the shape out around that. So hopefully that makes sense. But let's see. Actually, pull this out here. Kind of maybe I feel like I over darkened it in some of these areas. So I'm going to rely on the play between the light and the dark to bring that top lip forward. Maybe what I can do is I can start to render that now. So here we get this light edge. I don't want to lean in too much here. Hopefully I didn't lean in. Too much. I need to bring in a little bit of a highlight along in here, but I had built up too much of the ebony pencil. It wasn't sticking at all. This is one of the advantages to working on the toned paper, is that the toned paper itself provides a value. I can bring in the highlights right on top of that. All right, does that help to see the opening of the glass a little bit better? I feel like that's working a little bit better. I'm going to come back to building up value and some of the lights there in a little bit. I'm going to come back in with my charcoal pencil. Actually, I need to smooth out some of these areas. So I think one of the tricks to using a smudging tool like this as Tortillion is that what I've seen a lot of students do is they'll grab it and they'll just use it to smooth out a shape without maximizing the opportunity for it to be a drawing tool itself. So it's a mark making tool that you can use to your advantage. And I think it's helpful to really perceive it as such. It's not just about getting rid of some of your marks or kind of smoothing them out. It does that, of course, but it's also a mark making tool. Use it to correct and adjust things. Something is off here. I didn't see that. Didn't see it correctly the first time. I feel like I need to cut this back down a little bit more. There we go. And then bring this mark down to correct that shape. Do some negative drawing. So if you are using your shading stump, again, use it to your advantage. You're always making marks. Everything is a mark. Erasers, charcoal, smudging sticks, they're all making marks that are all contributing to it. So make every mark count. What I mean by that, by making everything count, it's not necessarily getting it right, but you want that mark to mean something. You want to be thinking that it's doing something in your drawing. The same is true with painting. Every brush mark is serving a function, and if you're aware of what that function is, it's going to show in your final work. If you're kind of on autopilot, then you're missing some opportunities there. Maybe I'm going to sharpen this up. Sometimes a mark is just meant to smooth something out or to blend or something, but it doesn't mean every mark is the most important mark on the drawing. But you want to be thinking that every mark you make has a purpose, has a meaning. Sometimes a mark is just to serve some other aspect of the drawing, you know, darkening an area to make the light feel more intense, or adding a line that doesn't exist to add to the expressive quality to it. All right, so this is the area that I was concerned about earlier, about building up too much graphite, and it seems to be working out all right. I like that. I'm going to use the side of my pencil, because then what this is going to do is actually sharpen the pencil again, because I'm losing some of that edge. And so, you know, you can create a really fine line, not even using the point of it, but you can see that I drew that. I just kind of scraped along the ridge of the edge of the pencil to create that fine edge. And I didn't need to necessarily use the tip of the pencil. All right. Need a little bit more control here to really see what this angle is. And this edge just kind of gets lost a bit in the highlight there. I can erase that out a little bit. And if I lose some of these ridges, one of the things you can kind of do is use your eraser to, I'm trying not to pull too hard with it, but just follow along the path of that line. And it helps to make that ridge a bit more visible while also keeping it subtle. That was a bit too hard there. All right, I'm feeling pretty good about that now. I feel like we're getting the kind of the gist of things right now with the cup. Jackie here, how long are these demos? They're anywhere between an hour and a half. Where are we at right now? Well, I'm a little over an hour, so this is going to be a little bit longer. But it is what it is. I'm just going to go until they're done. They go up as recordings afterwards, which you can then view if you've got to step out and would like to see how this finishes up. Then, of course, you're always welcome to watch the recording. All right. So now what I want to do. Let's just get into that shadow there. One of the things you can kind of do to mask this edge here. So I want to be careful about creating a halo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my eraser up against that edge that I want, and then run my horizontal marks right up to that. And you can see that creates a nice sharp edge there. And I'm going to use the same kind of technique as I used it back up in here. So I'm going to lay down the compressed charcoal using the pencil because it gives me a little bit more control. And so I'm going to try to do that with this as well. I'm going to use the pencil because it gives me more control, but I can switch to the charcoal stick a little bit later to kind of fill in some of those areas. One of the, as you saw what I was doing here is like I could have had a ruler to make that edge, but I actually kind of prefer to use kind of shorter straight edges because I can kind of build a line together using these short pieces, and that's going to feel more naturalistic than one solid straight kind of ruler drawn line. Sometimes a ruler or straight edge is too much of a guide, and it can kind of get in the way of the overall realism of the drawing. Try to perceive the overall shapes here. That run right off the page. This is a pretty sharp shadow, one of the things we talked about before is that you can actually see it here very subtly, is that the shadow is harder and sharper near the base of the object, and it gets more diffused up near the top. And that's very common with shadows, and you want to look for that. That helps to really create the illusion of light and dark, and create the illusion of that shadow when you're aware of that. And these are really interesting marks that kind of crisscross over one another. And I'm just trying to look at all these shapes. Hopefully they piece together to create the overall form that I'm looking for. Okay, there's that light right there is not where I need it to be. Just kind of sketching that in. I can correct it and clean it up a little bit later. All right, so what I can do, actually what I'm going to do now is start to erase out some of these lines. So I'm drawing using the eraser, trying to mimic these lighter areas and pulling them out of the shadow there, keeping that area fairly clean. Using the sharp edge of the eraser in some of these fine areas. And I need to ask myself how precise I need to be in this. But I think what's ultimately what's important to me, I think, as I'm looking at this, is finding this point right here, because that's coming through the center of the glass. But because of the perspective of the shadow, it's not equidistant to go from this front edge of the shadow to this point and from this point to the back edge. They're not the same distances because of that perspective. It's a little bit shorter on the back edge than it is on the front edge. So I need to put that point somewhere right around in here. And that is, I think, it's going to be ultimately more critical than getting every single one of those light beams established. So that getting that central point is going to be really helpful. Yeah, so we're about an hour and 10 minutes into this drawing right now, and my guess is we're going to go another 15 minutes or so. We can hang on as long as you want. Each one of these takes a little bit longer, shorter than another. Just the nature of this whole process. Yeah. So in this case, I don't think I placed this kind of crossover point correctly in relationship to the rest of the shadow, but I want to kind of move this drawing along, and I think what's most critical is less the distance along this horizontal axis and more the placement between the two edges of the shadow. That's ultimately what's most critical, I think, in terms of really creating that convincing light. So I'm going to call it good. And I think if you're following along, if you're aware of areas that are off, ask yourself, is that a problem? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. You know, you look at the drawings of Van Gogh, for example. He was great at making calculated choices to serve the drawing, and in that, like, he'll mess with the perspective. The proportions might be off in certain areas, not by a whole lot, but I think he recognizes that by going in and correcting it is going to sacrifice something else that's attractive in the work. There's an emotional quality to it. There's something in the marks that he would want to maintain that to him is more valuable than precision and photographic representation. And so you can ask yourself that as well, where you each have your own kind of threshold for what's acceptable in your own work and what's not. And to say, hey, maybe this mark is wrong, but I just like it. Or maybe it's wrong and I don't like it. Maybe it's right and I don't like it. You're in control of that. In this area, I'm just suggesting the light. You know, there's some craziness going on here as the light's just bending and bouncing through the glass. So this is just the divine charcoal again on top of the compressed charcoal. Looking for areas where it's darker. It's a little bit lighter in some areas. All right, how do we feel about that? I need to smudge now. Now I'm going to do some drawing with the smudging stick. And there's some areas where I can build up some of the values. I really want to be thinking about the marks here. This is a great place for me to use this smudging tool to create some of these kind of crisscrossing kind of light beams that are showing through in this overall light area. Oh, you're welcome, Annabelle. Thank you for joining. How'd you smudge the compressed charcoal background so smoothly? So again, if you missed the earlier part, you can kind of go back and watch the recording if you need to. But in this case, I flipped the background from my normal process. So instead of using vine charcoal to lay down a layer of charcoal, I used the compressed charcoal right off the bat. And then instead of using my smudging stick to blend that all together, I used the vine charcoal on top of the compressed charcoal. Now it creates a fair amount of dust that I just need to be aware of, but that's how I got it so smoothly. And that's kind of what I'm doing in this area as well. In some of these darker areas, laying down the compressed charcoal, then using the vine charcoal on top as both a smudging tool and just laying down the charcoal. All right, there's kind of this dark ridge in this part. So I'm trying to be mindful of the direction of these marks that are in this shadow, using the smudging tool to reinforce that. This still feels like kind of a hot mess in there, so I need to resolve that somehow. I think what I'm going to do is darken that and then try to erase out some kind of key lines. I didn't like that. Find out where the brightest parts are going to be. And again, I'm using the eraser to pull out some of these marks, but yeah, I think of it as really an additive process. In my mind, I'm making a mark here. I just happen to have an eraser in my hand. But I'm trying to think of it as a positive mark. I'm making something. I'm not erasing down to nothing. All right, hopefully that makes sense. All right, how do we feel about that? Feeling pretty good? I think let's just move this thing along. I know I'm going to need some fine detail in this area here. So I'm going to use my white chalk in such a way that I want it to be sharp when I get to those points. Now in this case, it's not sharp. I kind of dulled it by doing some of the detail work in there. So what I want to do is look for areas where I can kind of build up broader areas of value, like right in here. And I'm going to use the side of my chalk pencil, because I know that what it's going to do is sharpen as I go. It's going to help me achieve that point. And if it doesn't quite do that, I can always pull out my sandpaper and erase that down. But in the meantime, I'm just going to build up some value here. Just trying to think about the shapes that I'm observing. Same kind of process as when I'm using the charcoal. It's just trying to think of it as shapes. If I get lost, then I try to identify what it is on the object. And if I'm getting too kind of consumed by the object, then you go back to thinking of it as an abstract shape. So hopefully that makes sense. Trying to use the side, I feel like I'm just grinding down the grinding on the point too much. So I need to be using the side of it more, so I can conserve any tip, or I can get to a sharper point when I get into that shadow area. I think I may end up having to pull out the sandpaper to give myself a nice sharp point. But we'll see. All right, let's see here. This is kind of craziness, and I try to get in there and get every detail, but I'm not sure if it's going to ultimately matter a whole lot in the drawing. So, you know, if you're working on yours and you have a bit more time, you can spend a lot of time in here really working out those individual shapes. Thinking about this edge. All right, in this case, I want to bring this right over, kind of creating this light haze. Again, being mindful of the ridge in the glass. Some light there. How do I feel about this? I feel like there's a kind of a subtle light right back in here. It helps to define that edge. It gets a little bit darker, some gradients in there. All right, now this needs to be a little bit lighter. All right, that's feeling pretty good. All right. Taking a deep breath. I'm just going to do this for a little while because I'm going to kind of gather my thoughts for I think for me, what the most interesting part of the drawing is that shadow, the light coming through that dark shadow. So just taking a deep breath right now, doing something to keep my hand busy, but I'm trying to clear my thoughts before I tackle that. So that's feeling pretty good. All right. Right in here, I'm going to look for the brightest part in here, using the side of the pencil as I'm going to be sharpening that to a point, using that point in some other areas. I'm going to feather it out a little bit right up to this edge. Bit of a lost and found edge in here. That light is so bright. And you can see how, the edges of that light forms on that shadow are softer than some of the highlights in the glass. All right, so here's where I can create kind of a highlight where those beams kind of converge. It's a little bit brighter. So I'm actually going to blend a little bit in this area. So I'm just being very light with this, just trying to smooth that out a bit. Adding in some of the details. come up to here now. Let's see. Again, a little bit more intense where there's a convergence of those beams. Really bearing down on here to build up that charcoal, not charcoal, the chalk. There's kind of a high point along in here as well. Trying to feather those edges just a little bit. It's going to suggest some of those details. I'm not really happy with the way that light is looking there. So what I want to do is I'm going to erase that back down. What happened, I think there was just too much charcoal right there. And so the chalk was mixing into it. Let's see if this brightens it up a little bit. Just looking for some of those bright spots in there. All right. I can add a few more kind of highlights in along here. I feel like that's pretty much it. I'm going to continue to clean this up. So thank you for sticking around for so long. This was a bit longer, about an hour and 25 minutes or so. So you see what you mean about the ebony not sticking to the graphite. I use a 4H to do some outlines. Yeah, 4H, really hard pencil, and that's going to remove the tooth of the paper. And it can be difficult to build up on top of that. And what can sometimes happen then is it creates kind of an embossed line that is hard to really kind of get, you'll see it as you layer other materials on top of it. But yeah, if anybody else has any kind of insights about the materials you're using, I like the ebony pencil because it's I can be fairly light with it. It makes such a dark mark. But you got to be really kind of sensitive to it. So again, here at Artist Network, we're just looking for ways to keep our skills sharp during this time, and wanting to share that with you all. If you're curious about other videos in the series, check out the page on artistnetwork.com. At the very top, you'll see a section that for drawing together. It's a series that we pulled together just to kind of help us all connect during this time. There's other drawing resources there. Lots of other video resources at Artist Network. I know there's a special going on for the subscription. Hundreds of videos that you can watch. And I said it before, but I think it's really kind of important, at least to me, is that we're as an artist, as an instructor, I like to meet students where they're at. It's you're all going to be at different stages in your career. Some of you are just getting started. Some of you probably have far more experience than I do. But we can all learn from each other. And that's what I really like about this live format, is we can start to interact with one another and share our own observations. And so, check out what other resources, what works for you. Find the artists that you really connect with. Experiment with different media. So if you're a drawer, try painting. If you paint, try drawing. Try pastel or something like that. If you've never done it, this is a great time to experiment, explore, and kind of to really kind of focus on your craft. So thank you again for joining me. I'm going to let this go a little bit. Lisa, you had a question about the materials list. If you look in the description of the video, you'll find it there along with the photo reference. You're going to also see the photo reference for the next one. That's the hat. Yeah, hats off to you. That's going to be a really fun one. I'm going to try something different with that one. So hopefully you'll join me at Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern time. I see. Yeah, Linda, pass along to several friends too. Great, that's good to know. Yeah, share it with your friends. I think the more we can get together to, again, to kind of share resources. In some of the previous ones, I got some really good feedback, about the drawing. I got some corrections, things that I, hadn't, quite gotten correct in my own drawing. I've learned about new tools and techniques from other people. So the more people we get involved, the more we can exchange these ideas. So I encourage you all to kind of share and see if we can build up this community. This is all free. We just want to help build a community around all of this. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to keep this going. So if you have any kind of final thoughts that you want to call out to the group, I'll leave it up for a bit, because I found that once I shut down the live feed, then of course it shuts down the live chat, and sometimes it's cutting off people who are in the middle of their thoughts. So I'll just let it go for a little while. I hope it's as beautiful where you're at as it is here in Colorado. Ooh, that didn't work. Okay, that's better. Use a sticky note to cover over the middle parts of the water to get the edge of the fluted glass. I think that's a great masking tool. You just take a piece of paper, a sticky note, something like that, create an edge. That's a good point. Yeah, that works. It's a good tip. Let's see, call out who did that. That was. That's Charles. Is that you, Marie? I think that is. Lovely in Pennsylvania. It's good to hear. Yeah, get out your drawing tools, Gloria. That's fantastic. I think, again, if you can not have any expectations, if you're worried about it. Somebody posted last time being a little intimidated to draw. But I get it. I think we all experience that at some point. So, just do the best you can. You don't have to share it with anybody. This can be purely for you. I know for me, like if I find that I'm trying to do a drawing for somebody, then the pressure is on, and that really messes me up. Let me sharpen this edge here. That was a great tip. Yeah, I forgot. I do this a lot when I'm painting and masking off areas, not with masking tape, but with my palette knife. That's a tip I learned from an artist, Larry Seiler. I filmed a painting course with him, and he kind of showed that. I use it all the time now. All right. Everybody good? Oh, you're welcome. So, yeah, it's great to have that Micah connection. I think it's changed quite a bit since I was there. I graduated in 2000, so it's been a while since I was back there, but I sure miss Micah. That was a grand old time. Still have friends in that area. All right. I'm going to call it a day. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Wednesday, 3 o'clock. Hats off to you. So what's coming up, you'll see the reference photo for that one in the description here. So if you want to get a jump start on it. But what I'm actually going to do, this is my plan at this point, which can always change, is to actually work on black paper, and I'm going to use only my white chalk pencil to build that up. And so there's actually going to be a lot of negative drawing in that. That's my thinking right now, but it could change. So check out that reference photo. How do you think the white spot in first shadow is? Oh, in this part of the, yes, yeah, I think it definitely is too big. But in this case, I feel like it works in the drawing. If I need to make that smaller, I can always cut back in on top of it with the charcoal there. So just like that, you kind of cut back into it. So again, I mean, if you're working and you got to decide for yourself what the threshold is for correctness, if you need to make any changes there, but we'll figure it out. Good enough for me. I think it's just been, for me, it's really the time drawing with you all, taking this time for myself is what is ultimately enlightening. So have a great day. See you all on Wednesday.